Hello all and welcome to Coping with COVID's HeadGame. My name is Thomas Coffin, and tonight my guest is the Director of Athletic Performance and Psychology at our own Boise State University, Stephanie Donaldson. Real quick, I just want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming onto our show on such short notice.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, just to get right into the questions, you are the Director of Athletic Performance and Psychology, so you specifically counsel a lot of the sports teams we have here. And I'm sure we're all well aware of how COVID has adversely affected just sports in general. Has the cancellation of a lot of sports-related activities taken any sort of toll on the mental health of players or coaches?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of what we talked about in the beginning had to do with the mental complications, the mental implications of COVID-19, right? It was focused so much on the physical complications of it, and not a whole lot at first, and rightly so. We had to focus on the physical, but not a whole lot was on the mental. To be honest, that was like where my head went immediately was, oh my gosh, there's going to be a lot of mental health implications that come from this. And it really, it showed that it really has affected student athlete mental health. The NCAA did a study that showed that it was like 2 times the rate of mental health concerns or issues were double what it normally is in like pre-pandemic times. And so it's been shown that there were elevated levels of mental exhaustion, anxiety, a lot of worry, hopelessness, feelings of depression. And so, yeah, absolutely it has, but not just student athletes. I mean, I think universally as a collective whole, if you're a human being, your mental health has been affected by it. So of course, coaches as well has been hit. And for me, it was a real turning point of I was like, oh, we'll be back in a week. Like, this isn't that big of a deal, right? And then I think for me, it was actually the cancellation of March Madness. And then professional sports for me, it was like, oh my gosh, this is real. And I think it really highlighted the importance of sports in our world for mental health too, how important it is, and how much joy and distraction and just people are able to get from the world of sports. And so when you take that away, I think a lot of people saw changes in their own mental health, even fans too, right? So yes, it affected student athletes, it affected coaches, but there's so much more to the sporting world too that it did affect fans and staff, coaches, everyone.
For the people who did use sports, either watching it or playing it, as a sort of emotional outlet for anxiety, negative feelings, all that sort of pent up stuff you don't normally get a chance to release, you're just on your average day by day, what alternatives would you recommend for those people?
Well, we did a lot. I think we used the kind of when we had to hit a pause button with sport. We used that for time to discover what are some other ways that you can cope with stress and anxiety. So if a lot of times these guys, their outlet is when they're on the field and they're able to be in their zone and their element, and that was taken away. And so it was an opportunity to explore some other ways and avenues to think about a stress bucket that we all have, and it fills and fills, and we need releases to let some of that stress out. Otherwise it gets super sloppy and sloshes all around and starts to affect our life. And so this is even pre-COVID, but COVID gave the pause button where we were kind of forced into having to really think about it. And so we talked a lot about deep breathing, relaxation, mindfulness, the importance of mindfulness and being in the present moment. We learned how to belly breathe, diaphragmatic breath, and really actually gave us some time to focus on the mental health that maybe a lot of times in athletics, we're really good at taking the physical reps. And it was a time to actually step back and take some of those mental reps as well.
That's really good. And of course, that's just advice anyone could use as well, not just sports players. There's sort of a feeling of just general hopelessness going around. Not necessarily, everything's lost, but people don't feel like they have too much to look forward to right now, I guess. What would you say to
Definitely.
people like that?
Well, I think that it's a delicate question, right? Because COVID, there has been so much loss that has come with COVID and lives that have been lost. I mean, so many lives have been lost. And so, so much of this is like, it's a delicate balance because yes, we need to be able to look forward to things. We need to be positive, but we also need to respect everyone else's process and experience through this pandemic. And so my experience is going to be different than yours and different than, your classmate. It varies. And so I think we need to first understand that the process is different for everyone and understand that it's also a process of grief and loss. I mean, I'm not talking about like the loss that we usually talk about is death and how do you mourn that loss? How do you work through it? And absolutely is a part of this pandemic, but also there's this ambiguous loss that's happened where it's a loss like we haven't had to deal with, where it's just these one after another loss, and we don't know what's happening next. And so that uncertainty has been hard, and I think creates a lot of hopelessness for people. But I think once you're able to process that, it is important to, come through that process and you gain hope, but you gain acceptance. And then you're able to say, okay, like moving forward, there are things to look forward to. And absolutely, I mean, as things start to move, we get down in numbers and we're able to socialize more, be around people. That's something to look forward to. Sports coming back, that's something to look forward to for sure. I just heard that they're going to let fans into the spring game. So it's just, there's lots of things moving forward to look forward to. But I just say that while also saying we need to be respectful of the loss that people have had.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good standpoint to take on that.
For sure.
On a bit of a lighter note, something that a lot of people, it took up a little bit to realize. I know it did for me. It took a little bit to just realize that it was affecting me, but COVID has messed up a lot of people's routines. If you go out, get in your car, drive to work, maybe you go to your favorite coffee place every day. But with COVID, many people are working from home. You're doing school from home, all online, and you don't really sort of have a routine anymore. And a lot of people, including myself, found it very comforting. And you didn't really realize that comfort was there until it was taken away.
That's so true. That is so true. Yeah.
What advice would you have on sort of coping with the loss of all these routines we had?
Yeah, I would say that right out of the gates, that's the one thing, and you're so right, that people struggled with because, especially student athletes that are so structured. I mean, their days are planned out by the minute on what they need to do. And so that was a huge, huge change. I know for me personally, it was a big change, and getting used to, working in a different environment. You talk about working, you're having classes virtually. I'm suddenly, doing counseling sessions from my bedroom, it was a lot of change. And I think we tend to be creatures of habit, and we find comfort in that habit and that routine. And it forced a lot of us to get uncomfortable, which is okay, because through that you can learn to, I always say, learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's really a lesson that we kind of were forced to learn. And so a piece of it from the beginning was like, okay, so you don't have your schedule with practice and everything on it, but how do you create your own schedule? And that was hard for a lot of people, because it's just been created for them. They had to learn how to create their own schedule and how to figure out, what they can control and what they can't control. And I think it was a really good life lesson. I know for myself personally, it was learning how to pivot and be adaptable and be flexible, which isn't necessarily the easiest for me to do, So it was all in all, I think, good, but you're so right about being creatures of habit and finding comfort in that routine. But I always am like, hey, you got to get uncomfortable if you want to create change and do things differently. So for a lot of these guys, it was challenging, but it ended up teaching a really good lesson.
That's a really good saying. And it
Yeah.
applies to a lot of things in life.
Doesn't it?
If
Yeah.
you're wanting to go into film, if you're wanting to go into any sort of profession, you are going to be uncomfortable. And
that's a
I
good
think
thing. It's
that,
learning to embrace it.
yeah, I think that the whole experience of COVID has taught people a lot of lessons that they might not really sort of understand until after the pandemic is over. Do you think there's any sort of lasting effects or lessons we've learned from this that we'll be able to carry on to life after COVID is dealt
Absolutely.
with?
Absolutely. In fact, that's like one of my biggest hopes that comes from this, because I think that as a collective whole, we have actually started talking about mental health. It's like, oh my gosh, that's an okay thing to talk about. We can talk about this. You don't have to like whisper and hide in the corner. Like, for me, that's been awesome to see, because I think it's so important to collectively change the conversations we have about mental health. And, I'm not, making light, like the pandemic has again created so much loss, but from it, I think we've learned to talk about our mental health, the importance of it. I hope that that continues and continues on that trajectory upwards, where it just becomes as normal as like you went to the, doctor to get your eyes checked. It's just something we can talk about. And so I think that is huge for me. But I also have spent a lot of time talking as we kind of integrate back into, normal life or whatever that looks like now, of okay, so what are some of the things that you maybe had the time to like actually focus on? So maybe you learned, some of the athletes learned how to do diaphragmatic belly breath. So taking that, how can you take what you learned and be able to apply it now as we go and things get busy and life starts up again, and don't you don't have the same time. So you've got to figure out how to integrate it back in where you maybe had way more time when things were paused. And so I think that's a huge takeaway of like, what are the things that you want to integrate into life as we get back into whatever this normal life is going to look like? What do you want to take with you, and what do you want to keep, and how do you keep those habits up? Because life's going to get busy again,
That's all really good to keep in mind, especially with all the vaccines coming out. We are closer to COVID being over than we ever have been since it started. I think
Absolutely.
that's great for everyone to start thinking about. I understand that you have been a big part of this relatively new program at Boise State called Bronco Bold.
Right. Yeah. Yep. It's very very cool. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so Bronco Bold is our student athlete initiative that it's student athlete led though, that really focuses on kind of, like what I just talked about being able to talk about mental health and using the platform of sport to have the student athletes talk about mental health, their own struggles, their own challenges, their own victories with mental health, and the importance it plays not just in sport but in life. And so, again, using that platform of sport, being able to get that voice out and talk about mental health and normalize the conversations. That's a big piece of it, is just normalizing it and having it be something that we can openly talk about. And so Bronco Bold, we unfortunately haven't been able to because of COVID, but last year before last, we did mental health awareness games, mental health awareness week, and did things out in the community that centered around mental health awareness. And then also within the athletic department, we do workshops where they can learn various things about mental health, coping skills, mental health awareness, how to improve their mental health, things like that. So there's a part of it that's educational, and a part of it that is prevention as well.
That's incredible. Do you have any plans to expand that at all to people other than student athletes?
Well, so for right now, it's like the part of it is it's the student athletes platform to talk about mental health. And so it's community outreach, it's into the community, it's not just the athletic department. And so, for instance, they have a social media site. The handle is at Boise State Jet, and Jet is JETT. So Jet is our athletic sports therapy dog that I could talk about if you want. But so on Instagram, it's at Boise State Jet. JETT, and they use that as a platform to be able to put out mental health information that's not just obviously for student athletes, it's for the public as a whole.
That's amazing. And that is actually all the time we have tonight. Once
Awesome.
again, Stephanie Donaldson, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing talking to
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you so much for having me.